Howdy, folks. This is Big Sam. Welcome back to the Mosins Museum. Today, we're talking about a really interesting subject. A very kind of strange and specific one at that. We're talking about how Finland managed to acquire a large amount of American-made Mosin Nagants right after World War I. Now, it's funny because I think a few of our viewers may not even realize that America made Mosin Nagants, and the details of that are going to have to be saved for another video, but in short, some of us forget these days, but back in World War I, the United States was allied with Russia, but even before we were technically involved in the war, we were still helping out Russia by producing large amounts of Mosin Nagants for them because, well, let's face it, they just couldn't make enough guns. Their army was just too big, and they were losing too many men and rifles to be able to resupply them domestically. So, we have all of these Mosin Nagants that were produced by America, and then we sent them over to Russia. What happened to those is kind of an interesting topic, because I think a lot of these guns didn't actually end up where we would assume they ended up. What do I mean by that? Well, we need rifles that we can actually take a look at and hold with our hands, observe what markings do they have, and sometimes, even more importantly, what markings do they not have, to sort of get the lay of the land and determine where guns ended up. Now here we have a New England Westinghouse produced Mosin Nagant made in America, probably around 1918. Now the one caveat with Westinghouses is they're all dated on the barrel 1915, but that's not when they were actually made. That's when the contract was implemented. Well, actually, there's a couple contracts. Again, this is all stuff for a different video, which we haven't done yet. But just note, some Westinghouses were made 1917, 1918. They'll still say 1915 on them. Okay. This one actually wasn't used in Finland, as far as we can tell, but I just have it here just for reference. This is a same gun, basically, as what we're talking about today. A M91 Mosin produced by New England Westinghouse or by Remington. We're kind of talking about the same group of guns because guns produced both by Remington and Westinghouse would basically end up in the same places regardless, for the most part. Again, that might be a story for another video. This gets really complicated, and we start having to talk about other places like South America, Mexico, but we're not going to do that today. It's really easy for me to get sidetracked, so I got to stay on topic, guys, and you got to help me. All right, Finland. How did Finland get these guns? Well, if we look at New England Westinghouse Mosin Nagants that were imported from Finland to America, which I would say it's rough estimate, at least 75% of the American-produced Mosins you're going to see in America were actually imported from Finland, which is really interesting. It's really important to look at the markings. Now, I said this earlier, but this is a really important point, so I want to mention it again. Sometimes the markings a rifle doesn't have is even more important than the markings that a rifle does have. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. What do I mean by that? Well, in this specific case, we think of Finnish M91s like this, being acquired post-World War I, right? They acquired all sorts of these guns after World War I from places like Austria, different countries in Europe, mostly Western Europe. And a lot of these guns would have interesting markings. Some of them were converted to the 8x50 rim cartridge, and you'd see a lot of them with the AZF capture marking on the receiver. Of course, not all of them, but that's probably the most common capture marking to see on the receiver. Also, you can see a lot of Finnish M91 rifles that look just like this one that'll have a little cartouche. Usually it's on the right side, on this side of the stock, and it's in a circle, and it'll say Deutsches Reich on it, which is property of the German military. And that was marked during World War I, because remember, if you watched our last video, we talked about how, to start off with, Finland got like probably over 100,000 or close to Mosin Nagants given as war aid from Germany. And a lot of those guns were going to have German capture markings on them. All right, point number one. We don't really see, or at least I have never seen, and I've looked at a ton of Mosins, so it gives me a decent lay of the land. Of course, there's definitely stuff still out there I haven't seen. But I have not seen any kind of American-produced Mosin that had its original stock with a German capture marking on the stock. Okay? Or, for that matter, a German capture marking on the receiver. Now, those are way less common, but they're still out there. I've never seen either of these on an American-made Mosin. Now, you can have, a Westinghouse or a Remington Mosin in a stock with a German capture marking, but you have to look closely because it's probably not the original stock. The original stocks for the Westinghouse and Remington guns are going to be produced of largely walnut, if I remember correctly. So that's really the easiest way to tell. Now, the other point is the Austro-Hungarian guns. The AZF marking is, I want to be cautious in how I word this. I wouldn't say it's common, but it's one of the more common capture markings. It's not super difficult to find here in the U.S. if you look hard enough. I've seen a ton of these. Never seen a Remington or New England Westinghouse Mosin with an AZF marking. Now, that's not to say they don't exist. I've just never seen one. And because I've never seen one, despite all the Mosins I've looked at, that tells me that not a lot of these guns ended up where you'd think they ended up. Because, look, if America makes, millions of these guns, they send them to Russia, you'd think, oh, well, naturally, they're going to get captured by the Germans or the Austro-Hungarians. And, of course, some of them did. But it doesn't seem like very many of them did at all. In fact, I've never seen evidence of one before. So what does that really tell us? Well, I think it tells us something important. It tells us that there is some quirkiness going on with the Russian supply chains back then. Now, one other caveat is a lot of these guns were held up and didn't even make it to Russia. Some of these were holed up in England, actually. And when we sent a lot of American forces up to invade North Russia, in Murmansk and Archangel, we staged them in England, and in England, we armed them with supplies of these M91 rifles made in America, and then we sent them up there with them. And that's another story for another day. But these guns were everywhere. Some of them, though, we know absolutely were in Russia and never made it to the front, though. And how do we know this? Well, this brings us to our topic of today, which is the Great Gun Train of 1918. Now, this gets interesting because I've seen actually a couple different stories and a couple different trains that are referred to as the Great Gun Train. Seems like the first one happened right around January of 1918, right at the beginning of the Finnish Civil War. There was a gun train coming from Petrograd, sent from the Russian government to help the Bolshevik Reds, the Finnish Red forces, essentially, in the Finnish Civil War. This was even before the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. So this is, again, in January of 1918. Now, right at the beginning of the war, Finland, they got some militia groups and some other guys, and they never really done a lot like this before. They're going to try to assault this train because it's carrying large amounts of arms and guns and ammunition. And not only do they not want that to get in the hands of their enemy, they want to take that and put it in their hands, because that's going to put them in a huge advantage. Well, they tried, and they failed. This was known as the Battle of Kamara. You can look that up if you want to. The A's have the little umlauts, so they sound kind of funny. It's a Finnish word. Anyway, now they weren't successful in this. Mannerheim's troops weren't. However, They learned from their mistakes. They figured out what went wrong, and then they tried it again on another train, often called the Great Gun Train, in February of 1918, which was coming from Petrograd. Kind of the same story, to arm the Red Finns in the Finnish Civil War. And I believe this was like the Battle of Antrea, Antrea, if I'm not mistaken. I have to check it again, but you can look that up and tell me I'm wrong. But they were actually successful in this one, is my understanding. And that train had approximately 15,000 Mosin Nagant rifles. And these, again, most likely, these were all American-made Mosins that were sent as aid to Russia. They never made it to the front. And the Russians in 1918 said, we're going to send these to help out the Red Finns in the Finnish Civil War. And then Mannerheim's troops got a hold of them and subsequently routed them, and then they won the Finnish Civil War, and kind of know the rest of the story. And this is where we actually get most of the American-made Mosins that we see ended up in Finland. It was probably from this one train. There might have been a couple others. 15,000 guns is a fair amount. However, I will say one caveat. There's a lot of, especially New England Westinghouse, they're a little bit more common than the Remington Finnish guns, but you can find them both. But I've seen enough to where I feel like Finland probably had a little bit more than 15,000. So certainly they got them from other places besides just this train. However, if you have a New England Westinghouse rifle or a Remington Mosin Nagant rifle with a little SA in a box on it, which of course is the Finnish Army property marking stamped during the Continuation War, very, very good chance that that gun actually came off of that Great Gun Train that was coming from Petrograd in February of 1918, which is, I think, really cool. You can, pretty well have an idea of where that gun came from. I mean, that's a pretty well-traveled gun, for sure. Now, there's still some other interesting theories. I've always had an interesting idea that there was this top-secret classified mission that still is classified to this day, that our troops that were stationed up in Murmansk and Archangel were guarding some American-made Mosin Nagants up there. And, of course, they had some as well, and the stories I've heard actually left them there because they hated them so much. So what if there was this classified top-secret mission that they said, well, these guns are just going to end up in the Russians' hands anyway if we leave them, so let's just put these on a train and send them to Helsinki and at least give them to the Finns, because we know the Finns don't like the Russians. So that's a lot better than them getting in the hands of the Russians. I have never found any evidence that this is true. I've never seen a story or a report or any documentation that this is true. I've looked through a lot, but it's possible. And in my mind, it wouldn't seem that crazy, to be honest with you. So we'll keep doing research, and if I find any more interesting info, I'll let you know. And if you have any more interesting info, make sure to post down in the comments below. But I hope you guys enjoyed talking about this really cool topic. We're in this series on Finnish Mosins, and I thought this would be just kind of a cool separate video to do. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you guys have any prayer requests, and we'll see you next time.